Your brain blocks superhuman strength. The myth of superhuman strength. There's a story that's almost become legend. A man crashes his car, and his child is trapped underneath. Without thinking, he sprints to the wreck, plants his hands on the metal frame, and lifts. Neighbors say he raised nearly a ton of weight off the ground just long enough for someone to pull the kid free. Doctors later found he'd torn multiple muscles and dislocated his shoulder, but at that moment, he didn't care. He moved the car. And that single act made people wonder, do we all have hidden superhuman strength waiting to burst out when we need it? Here's where the myth kicks in. Most people think adrenaline creates strength, like flipping on a hidden power mode. That's not exactly true. Adrenaline doesn't magically turn you into the Hulk. What it really does is far stranger and far more scientific. It removes your brain's safety brakes. Under normal conditions, your brain acts like a cautious driver behind the wheel of a powerful car. The engine, your muscles, can generate enormous force, but your brain keeps a foot on the brake pedal, never letting you hit top speed. That's because strength isn't limited by muscle alone. It's regulated by a neural governor that decides how much power you're allowed to use before you risk tearing yourself apart. Every time you lift a heavy box, sprint upstairs, or throw a punch, that internal monitor is making calculations. How much tension can the tendons handle? How close is this to causing damage? Most of us only ever access about 60% of our true muscular potential. The rest stays locked away, not because we're lazy, but because our nervous system is protecting us from ourselves. The ironic truth is, our muscles could do far more than our brain is willing to let them. But every rule has exceptions. When the brain believes survival is at stake, when life or death feels seconds away, it can temporarily turn off that limiter. Adrenaline floods your bloodstream, your senses sharpen, blood flow shifts from your digestive system to your limbs, and pain dulls just long enough for you to perform the impossible. That's how someone can lift a car, run on a broken leg, or fight long after sustaining severe injuries. It's not the birth of a superpower, it's the brain's emergency override kicking in. Of course, that override comes with a price. Because when those biological limits vanish, the damage becomes real. The torn ligaments, the ruptured fibers, the extreme fatigue afterward, all of it reveals that the strength we unleashed wasn't free. The body pays dearly for the moments when the mind removes its guardrails. And that raises a deeper question. If our brains are built to hold us back, what happens when we learn to push past that safety system on purpose? Could we train ourselves to access more of that hidden strength safely? Or are those protective walls there for good reason? That's the mystery behind every extraordinary human performance, from the mother who lifts a car to the athlete breaking world records. It's not about defying biology, it's about negotiating with it. Pain, fear, and restraint aren't flaws in the system. They're the safeguards that kept our ancestors alive. But now, as science peels back those mechanisms, we're starting to see what happens when we cross nature's built-in red line. In this video, we'll explore that line, how the brain limits power, what happens when adrenaline overrides it, and why chasing that extra surge can blur the boundary between heroism and harm. Because the myth of superhuman strength isn't about what we gain. It's about what the brain is willing to risk when everything's on the line. Your muscles are lying to you. When you think of strength, you probably picture muscle size, the biceps that stretch a shirt sleeve with the powerlifter straining under absurd weights. But here's the twist. Those muscles aren't what's holding back your strength. Your brain is. To understand that, you need to separate actual strength from accessible strength. Actual strength is what your muscles could theoretically produce if every fiber fired at once. Accessible strength is how much of that potential your brain lets you use. Right now, if you're an average person, your nervous system only allows about 60% of your total output. It's like having a high-performance engine capped at half throttle. That invisible limiter is often called the central governor. It's not one specific part of the brain, but a network, primarily the motor cortex, spinal cord feedback loops, and sensory centers that constantly monitor tension, pain, heat, and fatigue. Think of it as a risk management system. When you lift something heavy, the governor calculates whether that load might tear muscle fibers or overstretch tendons. If the risk looks too high, it automatically reduces muscle activation, no matter how much you want to keep pushing. You can scream, strain, or tell yourself you've got one more rep. But if that neural circuit says no, the full power never arrives. Your brain isn't being cowardly, it's being protective. The connective tissues in your body, like tendons and fascia, can only handle so much. The average human tendon can endure forces up to about 1.5 times body weight before damage begins. Full muscle activation could generate 3, maybe 4 times that. If you ever actually hit 100% output, you wouldn't walk away stronger. You'd end up in a hospital with shredded fibers and torn joints. The pain that accompanies overexertion is the earliest warning signal that this structural failure is coming. Athletes, interestingly, live closer to this threshold than most people. Years of training don't exactly build supernatural muscles, they train the governor. Repeated safe exposure to stress tells the brain, I've been here before and I survived. Bit by bit, the nervous system allows slightly more power, a few more fibers recruited, a higher tolerance for lactic acid buildup. The brain becomes more confident that these stress levels won't cause disaster, so it eases the brakes. That's why elite performers can access maybe 80 or even 90% of their potential power without catastrophic failure. It's not brute force, it's trust built into the neurology. But here's the fascinating part. The central governor doesn't just limit strength to protect tissues, it's deeply tied to your sense of fatigue. That burning sensation in your legs during a sprint, it's not direct proof that you have no energy. It's your brain interpreting chemical signals and choosing to down-regulate effort before things get dangerous. In ultra-endurance athletes, studies show that the brain's perception of fatigue can precede actual physical depletion by hours. Essentially, the mind says stop, long before the body has to stop. It's error prevention disguised as exhaustion. There's a balance, though. That safety mechanism keeps us alive, but it also hides what's possible. Under ordinary conditions, we'll never feel what total capacity truly is. Only rare life or death moments, when adrenaline surges and logic takes a back seat, disable that circuit. That's when people lift cars or sprint on fractured bones. It's not because the muscles suddenly grew stronger, it's because the nervous system temporarily forgot to hold back. However, the cost of those moments can be brutal. When the governor is fully bypassed, you unleash force far beyond what your tendons or ligaments can tolerate. Reports from emergency rescues or combat incidents often describe individuals who later discovered pulled muscles, broken bones, or torn connective tissue, injuries they didn't even feel until minutes later. That's what complete neuromuscular freedom looks like. Unfiltered strength followed by biological chaos. If we could somehow tap that potential safely, human performance would look entirely different. But nature knows what it's doing. Our bodies were never optimized for maximum power output. They were designed for repeat survival. A muscle that holds a cliff edge once and tears apart isn't as useful as one that can climb again tomorrow. Evolution favored endurance and protection over raw output. The governor is the deal we sign without knowing it. Less power in exchange for more longevity. Still, that doesn't stop scientists and athletes from wondering, can you negotiate with the governor? Can mental training convince the brain to lift the safety lock just enough to reach higher performance without self-destruction? The evidence says yes, to a point. Controlled stress training, mental rehearsal, and gradual low progression seem to recalibrate where the governor intervenes. The key is incremental tolerance, not defiance. The body learns that it's safe, and the brain updates its protection thresholds accordingly. But before we get into how to trick that system, we need to explore what happens during those rare moments when it shuts off entirely, the brain's version of an emergency override. Because while most people assume adrenaline gives them power, the truth is it simply silences fear, pain, and hesitation long enough to remove the brakes. And once that happens, the results are as dangerous as they are extraordinary. Adrenaline, the brain's emergency override. When the central governor steps aside, one chemical takes the wheel, adrenaline. It's the body's built-in emergency protocol, released in seconds when the brain decides survival comes first. You feel it as that full-body jolt, the surge in your chest, the rush in your ears, the sudden clarity that almost feels superhuman. But at a biological level, it's a highly coordinated chain reaction designed for one purpose, give you just enough power to escape or fight before the system collapses. Here's how it starts. The moment your brain registers a threat, pain, fear, danger, the hypothalamus sends an electrical signal to the sympathetic nervous system, to your adrenal medulla, tiny glands that sit like caps on your kidneys. Within seconds, they flood your bloodstream with adrenaline or epinephrine. This hormone binds to dozens of receptors across your body, triggering a synchronized response. Heart rate climbs. Airways expand. Blood vessels constrict in your skin and stomach, redirecting flow to your muscles. Glycogen in your liver breaks into glucose, pouring instant fuel into your system. Oxygen, sugar, and speed become your top priorities. Digestion, reasoning, and even pain perception drop down the list. At the same time, tiny shifts happen in your brain. The amygdala, which processes fear, lights up. The prefrontal cortex, the part that usually slows you down with logic, quiets. In other words, the system suppresses hesitation. The entire organism shifts from preserving energy to using it, no questions asked. That's what people mean when they say they acted without thinking. They really didn't. The rational parts were offline, replaced by ancient instinct. Now, about that myth that adrenaline creates strength, it doesn't. What it really does is clear the interference. It dials down the pain signals that would normally send stopping instructions to the central nervous system. Think of it as pulling the fuses on the alarm system. The muscles can now contract harder because the return messages screaming "stop" aren't getting through. At the same time, adrenaline activates more motor units, groups of muscle fibers linked to single neurons, letting you recruit more of your existing strength. Normally, you're capped somewhere around 60% of potential output. Under a full adrenaline flood, you might hit 80, maybe 90 for a few chaotic seconds. It's a dangerous privilege powered by chemistry. That pain-numbing effect is one of adrenaline's most deceptive tricks. It alters how your spinal cord and brain interpret pain signals, effectively raising your pain thresholds so your mind doesn't panic too early. Soldiers, first responders, and accident survivors often describe being shot, burned, or broken without realizing it until much later. Their bodies were in shock, yes, but chemically speaking, adrenaline had hijacked the sensory network, prioritizing movement over preservation. You can act with precision while profoundly injured because the system temporarily vetoes the feedback that would tell you to stop. But for every benefit, there's a price tag. The fight-or-flight state was built for brief emergencies, not extended battles. Once the danger passes, adrenaline levels crash. Your blood sugar plummets, leaving you shaky, nauseous, or exhausted. Muscles that were flooded with calcium ions during contraction become acidified with lactic buildup. That's the burn you feel minutes later, only amplified because you exceeded safe output limits. The cardiovascular strain also doesn't vanish harmlessly. Prolonged high heart rate and blood pressure can tear microvessels, creating inflammation that lingers long after the hero moment ends. That's why people perform miraculous rescues or feats and then collapse immediately afterward. Their bodies weren't built to sustain that state. They were borrowing tomorrow's strength for today's emergency. The adrenaline spike gives you a brief window of heightened power at the expense of stability. When that hormone fades, tremors set in, clarity drains away, and pain floods back into awareness. Doctors see it constantly. Individuals who function flawlessly through severe trauma suddenly faint once help arrives. It's not weakness, it's the body collecting the bill. Let's look at a real scenario to make this concrete. In several documented cases of hysterical strength, witnesses have reported parents lifting cars off trapped children. Medical follow-ups tell the missing half of the story. Torn pectoral muscles, ruptured tendons, spinal strain, months of recovery. The adrenaline stopped them from feeling any of it in the moment, but the physical damage was immense. What looked like heroism was actually the body overriding its own emergency protocols. The power was real, just unsustainable. Interestingly, researchers find that smaller controlled doses of adrenaline, like those triggered in sports or intense focus, can sharpen performance without total system overload. That's the sweet spot athletes train toward. They practice activating portions of the stress response without tipping into chaos. Controlled breathing, visualization, and pre-competition rituals help them trigger small adrenaline spikes that heighten reaction and focus while staying below the destructive threshold. It's bioengineering through practice, using chemistry responsibly instead of reactively. But in untrained settings, adrenaline is closer to chaos. The body isn't deciding based on odds, it's deciding based on fear. The flood of energy, the almost supernatural clarity, feels empowering, but it's built on cutting corners the body uses to protect itself. Blood thickens to carry more oxygen, which increases clotting risk. Peripheral vision narrows to focus on threats, which means tunnel vision, great for predators, terrible for modern hazards. You get stronger reactions at the cost of judgment and coordination. That's what makes the hormone both miraculous and dangerous. It's not a power-up. It's not a power-up. It's an emergency patch. There's also the emotional aftermath. Once adrenaline clears, cortisol steps in, prolonging alertness and repair. Many people report feeling emotionally drained, irritable, or even euphoric after near-death or high-intensity moments. That roller coaster isn't psychological weakness. It's the chemical seesaw between arousal and recovery. Your body has to restabilize all the systems that were thrown into overdrive. Heart rate, respiration, digestion, temperature regulation, all while processing shock and injury data newly arriving from the nervous system. That's why hands shake and knees buckle even after the crisis is over. The adrenaline didn't leave you superhuman. It left you temporarily broken, waiting to be rebuilt. If the central governor keeps us at 60% to guarantee survival, then adrenaline is the override switch labeled ignore all warnings. It's remarkable and necessary, but brutally temporary. Every time it flips, damage control begins almost immediately. So when someone asks if adrenaline grants superhuman strength, the real answer is yes, but only if you're willing to pay the biological price afterward. The irony is that evolution designed this system not to make us heroes, but to let us survive a single encounter and limp away to safety. It's emergency power, not upgrade mode. The stories of impossible strength aren't proof of limitless potential. They're proof that our limits exist for a reason. Because every time adrenaline pulls the guardrails off, it teaches the same hard lesson. Removing pain and fear doesn't make you invincible. It just hides how close you are to breaking. Section 3. Pain is the body's warning system. Pain gets a bad reputation. It's a thing we spend our lives trying to avoid. But biologically, pain isn't punishment. It's protection. It's the body's most ancient alarm system, designed not to ruin your day, but to save your life. Every sting, burn, or ache is data, an urgent message from one part of your body to another saying, if you keep doing that, something's about to break. The sensation of pain starts with tiny sensors called nociceptors. They sit everywhere, on your skin and your joints, around muscles, and they don't actually feel hurt. They feel change. A sudden rise in temperature, pressure, or chemical irritation triggers these nerve endings. Once activated, they fire electrical signals up to the spinal cord, sometimes skipping your conscious brain entirely. That's why you yank your hand away from a hot pan before you even realize it burns you. That reflex isn't a thought, it's a circuit, a survival fast lane that doesn't wait for permission. From the spinal cord, those pain signals branch in two directions. One path heads straight to motor neurons to pull you out of danger. The other climbs to the brain, where it gets translated into a feeling. Throbbing, sharp, dull, searing. The brain layers emotion onto that signal. Fear, frustration, urgency, because emotion motivates behavior. Pain isn't just a physical alarm, it's also a call to action. Without it, humans wouldn't survive long. There are people born with congenital insensitivity to pain, and while that might sound like a superpower, most don't live past early adulthood. They walk on broken bones, lean into open flames, or overheat without realizing it. Pain, unpleasant as it feels, is the price of staying intact. Now, when we push ourselves, running, lifting, climbing, those same nociceptors come online for a different reason. They're not warning of immediate danger. They're reporting load. The burning in your muscles during a workout isn't damage, it's communication. It tells the brain we're working hard, but still okay. The central nervous system interprets this flood of data and decides how much longer it's safe to continue. Some signals, like joint pain, suggest real structural risk. Others, like lactic acid burn, are tolerable stress. The real skill of any trained athlete is knowing the difference. Sports science calls this awareness interoception, the ability to read your body's internal feedback accurately. Elite endurance athletes develop it like a language. They learn which sensations mean stop and which simply mean discomfort. That's why runners can sustain pain that would make a casual jogger quit. They've studied their pain rather than fleeing from it. Their minds interpret it not as threat but as performance data. Oxygen debt rising, muscle fatigue approaching, heart rate holding steady. Pain ceases to be an enemy and becomes a dashboard. The problem for many of us is that pain and fear travel together. The moment we feel that burn, our brain predicts catastrophe. We quit not because we've hit our true limit, but because we're afraid of reaching it. That's efficient from an evolutionary standpoint. Better safe than snapped tendon, but it also means we rarely explore where the real threshold lies. The trick isn't to ignore pain, it's to listen with context. Ask, is this warning or is this growth? There's a cultural misconception that enduring pain always means progress. No pain, no gain sounds tough, but it's physiologically wrong. Pain is non-linear. Chronic pain doesn't build strength. It rewires the nervous system to be more sensitive, not less. Ignoring serious pain doesn't make you resilient. It converts temporary warning signals into long-term dysfunction. Athletes who train through injury often pay the price later with degenerative joints or nerve damage. The ego wants to push through, but biology always collects the debt. What modern neuroscience tells us is that pain tolerance isn't about dulling sensation, it's about interpreting it. The brain can modulate pain signals based on attention, expectation, and emotion. If you believe the pain has purpose, say finishing a marathon or rescuing someone, the brain releases endorphins and enkephalins that bind to the same receptors as opioids, muting discomfort. That's partly why context changes everything. A cut during an intense game might go unnoticed, while the same cut at home feels unbearable. The chemical meaning of pain shifts with narrative. But what happens when those systems that moderate pain go quiet completely, like during an adrenaline surge? That's when trouble starts. Without feedback, you lose your body's early warning sensors. You can sprint on torn muscles, run barefoot over glass, or fight with broken bones because the system designed to stop you has gone offline. The pain will return later, magnified, but by then the damage is done. The protective loop only works when it's allowed to speak. So understanding pain isn't about overcoming weakness, it's about decoding communication. Pain evolved as a stopgap between damaging behavior and irreversible failure. The ache in your back when you lift wrong is your first line of engineering defense. The pulse in your chest when you overexert tells your oxygen delivery is at its limit. Every warning buys you time to correct course before something snaps. You can think of pain as the body's own failsafe, triggered just shy of failure, not after it. For centuries, philosophers and physicians viewed pain purely as suffering to be anesthetized or eliminated. Modern science reframed it as feedback, part of a dynamic learning system. It doesn't just tell you where you're weak, it teaches you where you're strong. Controlled exposure to manageable pain through training, recovery, or therapy recalibrates the nervous system, proving that the signal isn't the enemy, only the interpretation is. And that's why endurance athletes, climbers, or even people in rehabilitation talk about making peace with pain rather than erasing it. The confusing part is that the same signal can mean triumph in one context and disaster in another. That's why separating productive pain from destructive pain is the real art of performance. Productive pain comes with adaptation. Destructive pain ends adaptation. One pushes cellular growth, the other triggers degeneration. The more you tune into the difference, the smarter your nervous system becomes. Pain, then, isn't the wall between us and superhuman effort. It's the map showing exactly where that wall stands. Without it, strength turns suicidal. With it, we can explore the edge safely, nudge it, expand it, but not tumble over it. And that circles back to the brain's true purpose in limiting power. Pain is its megaphone, the loud announcement that the governor is engaged, telling you to step back before catastrophe. When people learn to read that language instead of silencing it, they don't just perform better, they survive longer. Because in the end, pain isn't the villain of human potential. It's the narrator, keeping us informed about the cost of every ounce of power we try to unleash. The psychology of pain barriers. What separates the people who collapse the moment pain hits from those who somehow keep going isn't stronger muscles, it's different minds. Physical toughness is built on mental architecture, and the blueprint matters more than size or age or talent. When pain arrives, most of us interpret it as a wall. The extraordinary interpret it as a question. Can I still move forward while it's here? Pain in many ways is a perception problem. The signal might be identical for everyone, burning muscle fibers, pounding heart, oxygen debt, but the interpretation differs wildly. Psychologists call this cognitive appraisal. The same sensations that someone labels as agony can be reframed by another as effort. That reframe alone changes brain chemistry, endorphins rise, fear circuits quiet, and tolerance increases. The pain hasn't vanished, it's just been translated into something manageable. Mental resilience is the skill of doing that translation on demand. Athletes don't become superhuman by ignoring what hurts. They learn to observe it without panic. Many use deliberate focus techniques like steady breathing or internal dialogue to keep rational control when the body's alarm system is blaring. Positive self-talk might sound cliche, but under stress, it stabilizes cognitive focus. The simple thought, "This feeling means I'm still in control," keeps the frontal cortex online when adrenaline tries to take over. That small act of mental balance can extend endurance far beyond predicted limits. There's solid science behind this. Studies comparing athletic and non-athletic populations consistently show higher pain tolerance in athletes, not because their nerves are dulled, but because their interpretation networks differ. Functional brain scans reveal reduced activity in emotion-related regions and increased activation in attention and motor planning areas. In simple terms, their brains devote less processing to how much it hurts and more to what to do next. That shift rewires experience itself. Pain becomes background noise instead of the full broadcast. Context also transforms pain's meaning. In competition or survival, pain signals significance. It tells you the moment matters, which injects purpose directly into suffering. Purpose is an analgesic. It changes hormonal cascades, reducing cortisol and amplifying dopamine reward circuits. That's why marathon runners often talk about the wall turning into euphoria once they push through. The effort begins to feel rewarding the second their brain associates it with progress instead of punishment. Fear plays a huge role here. Fear of pain magnifies it. Curiosity or determination reduces its emotional weight. When the mind fixates on what could go wrong, the limbic system amplifies sensory input, making each jolt sharper. But shift attention to task execution, maintaining rhythm, counting breaths, focusing on scenery, and the amplitude drops. Endurance sports psychologists teach athletes to use attentional control, toggling between association, focusing on bodily signals, and dissociation, redirecting attention outward depending on the goal. Mastering that toggle is like adjusting the volume knob on pain. Grit, the sustained perseverance toward long-term goals, binds all this psychology together. People with high grit scores persist despite repeated failure or discomfort. They don't necessarily enjoy pain, they just assign it a different story. Instead of seeing hardship as proof of inadequacy, they treat it as evidence they're playing at the edge of possibility. That shift in narrative compresses setbacks into milestones. The muscles still ache, but the meaning frames it positively, and that meaning determines endurance more than physiology ever will. Expectation also changes pain. Experiments show that when participants are told a task will hurt less, their brains release endogenous opioids even before the stimulus begins. It's the placebo effect repurposed into resilience. Athletes leverage this invisibly. Through confidence, routine, or visualization, they predict success, and the brain responds chemically as if success has already started. This expectation management essentially preloads the nervous system with defense mechanisms. Motivation operates as another amplifier, especially when tied to identity or social context. A runner performing for a team or a soldier protecting comrades experiences a dramatically higher pain ceiling. Neuroimaging attributes this to increased activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which integrates emotion, attention, and drive. Social purpose literally overrides suffering. That's why crowd energy boosts athletes in the final stretch. It's not mere encouragement, it's biochemical synchronization between purpose and pain. On the flip side, pain perception skyrockets when motivation collapses. Fatigue feels unbearable when it seems meaningless. In rehabilitation, therapists emphasize micro goals for this reason. Tiny achievable wins provide an emotional compass, transforming pain from a void into a ladder. Each rung up activates reward pathways that counterbalance nociception, keeping progress sustainable. Fear of failure might be the brain's loudest saboteur. When panic joins pain, the body tightens defensively, wasting energy and worsening sensations. Skilled performers train the opposite response, relaxation under strain. Breathing techniques borrowed from meditation or military training counteract stress hormones, restoring parasympathetic balance. It's not mystical control, it's chemistry guided by attention. Slow exhalation lengthens heart rate variability, signaling safety, which in turn lowers perceived pain intensity. The loop between mind and physiology becomes palpable. Calm thoughts dial down agony, which reinforces calm. Understanding this loop also clarifies why adrenaline alone doesn't guarantee heroism. Adrenaline erases pain by muting signals. Resilience manages pain by interpreting them wisely. One burns bright and costly, the other endures. That's a psychological bridge between survival instinct and enduring mastery. Real-world examples make it vivid. Ultra runner Kim Allen once ran nearly 500 kilometers with minimal rest. Her account wasn't about defeating pain, but negotiating with it. She described waves of hallucination and despair countered by microscopic focus, the next step, just the next step. That narrowed attention acted like a mental filter, shrinking overwhelming sensations into solvable moments. Pain tolerance, it turns out, is as much about time perception as pain itself. Shorten time horizons, and suffering loses scale. Compare that to team sports. Rugby players or fighters often push through impacts that would immobilize most people. Their secret partly lies in culture. In those circles, pain intertwines with pride and shared identity. Enduring it becomes a demonstration of belonging. Sociologists note that collective narratives reshape pain's emotional coding, turning it from isolation into connection. That social reinforcement can dull perceived intensity almost as effectively as drugs. Yet it's double-edged. When valorizing pain goes too far, injuries get hidden and consequences multiply. Mental fortitude must balance perception with responsibility, or resilience turns reckless. Psychological training aims to reach that equilibrium. Mindfulness, visualization, and cognitive restructuring aren't about pretending pain doesn't exist. They create mental distance so sensations don't dictate decisions. A climber hanging frozen on a wall, an injured soldier crawling toward rescue, a patient relearning to walk, all share the same pattern. Recognize pain, rename it, reframe it, and then resume action. Ultimately, the brain doesn't eliminate pain to extend performance. It reassigns its meaning. Under control, discomfort becomes data. Under chaos, it becomes devastation. That distinction explains why the best endurance feats come not from animal panic, but from practiced calm. The mind moderates the body's alarms just enough to explore further without self-destruction. That's where psychology meets biology, the gray zone between sensation and interpretation. Once someone masters that space, pain stops being a command to quit and starts being a conversation. And it's that conversation between fear, focus, and purpose that separates ordinary endurance from extraordinary. Because every great act of resilience isn't the story of someone who felt less pain. It's the story of someone who understood it, listened carefully, and kept moving anyway. When the brain fails to protect you, the brain's limiter exists for a reason, to stop you from destroying yourself. But there are rare moments when that internal safety system fails completely. When the floodgates open, strength that should never be possible surges through the body, and the results can be catastrophic. This is the legend of the superhero. It's the anatomy of failure in real time. The phenomenon often called hysterical strength isn't myth. There are documented cases throughout emergency history. Ordinary people lifting vehicles, bending metal, or running miles with massive injuries. But what's less romantic is what happens right after those miracles. The body left wrecked from the effort because the brain's protective filters were bypassed. The central governor, forced offline by adrenaline, no longer balances tension, oxygen, or pain. Every muscle fiber and tendon fires at maximum capacity, regardless of whether the tissue can handle the strain. It's power divorced from wisdom. Under normal control, your brain steadily recruits muscle fibers in sequence. It never lights up all of them at once because it reads feedback from sensors in the tendons, called Golgi tendon organs, that warn when force threatens to exceed structural tolerance. During hysterical strength events, that feedback loop is drowned out by intense, sympathetic activation. The nervous system goes from a careful conductor to a frenzied orchestra where every instrument screams fortissimo. The human frame simply isn't built for that. Tendons tear first. Those thick ropes connecting muscle to bone possess extraordinary tensile strength, but even they have limits. When every motor unit contracts simultaneously, the load spikes beyond their elasticity, producing micro-ruptures along the collagen fibers. A few seconds might mean survival, but the following weeks mean surgery or lifelong instability. Orthopedic surgeons describe these as plenovulsions, where the tendon literally rips free from bone. Victims of adrenaline-charged rescues often need reconstructive repair because their strength outpaced their anatomy. Muscles themselves suffer next. Full recruitment shreds fibers down to the cellular level. Normally, exercise creates microtears that heal stronger. Hysterical strength creates macrotears that overwhelm recovery. The result can be rhabdomyolysis, muscle breakdown so extreme that cellular contents flood the bloodstream, poisoning kidneys. Victims may require dialysis just to survive their own power. The irony is brutal. The body built to act saved a life, and in doing so, nearly ended another. Then there are the joints. During a natural lift, antagonist muscles stabilize movement by applying counterforce. In an emergency surge, those balancing muscles are overridden. The brain recruits everything in the same direction, like flooring both engines in a plane. Ligaments overstretch, cartilage tears, and bones grind under asymmetric load. Medical scans after some miraculous car lift incident show spinal compression fractures and dislocated shoulders despite no apparent pain at the time. The absence of pain wasn't protection. It was a silence before inflammation. Internally, the price keeps climbing. Adrenaline and cortisol flood the bloodstream, pushing glucose and fatty acids into frantic circulation. Lactic acid skyrockets from anaerobic contraction, forcing pH levels down and interfering with nerve signals. Nerves misfire, trembling starts, and precision collapses. When the crisis ends and adrenaline drops, that biochemical storm reverses violently. Blood vessels dilate, possibly dropping pressure so fast that victims faint. Many describe that crash as feeling hollowed out. Muscles trembling, stomach churning, skin clammy, sometimes followed by uncontrollable shivering as the body fights to rebalance. Neurologically, the hangover is just as punishing. The same sympathetic overload that silenced fear also burned through neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Once depleted, emotional equilibrium disintegrates. People emerge from these episodes not elated but terrified, sometimes confused or crying without understanding why. The mind interprets the hormonal withdrawal as despair. In combat medicine, this reaction is known as post-adrenaline collapse, a physiological, not purely emotional, consequence of the brain's emergency override. Even short of total collapse, bypassing safety circuits causes microscopic mayhem. Calcium ions flood muscle cells beyond control, leading to uncontrolled contraction known as tetany. Persistent cramping or spasms can last for days. The electrical storm doesn't stop when the danger does. The nervous system keeps firing echoes of the disaster it just survived. That's why people report hand tremors or uncontrollable shaking hours later. The motor neurons are still recalibrating from the overload. The paradox of hysterical strength is that success and injury are inseparable. You can't unleash that level of force without consequences. The very act that saves someone else may permanently damage the rescuer. Yet evolution allowed this mechanism to stay because statistically, it's better to live injured than to die cautious. It's a last-ditch gamble encoded deep in our wiring. Survival today, consequences tomorrow. But the myth attached to those events distorts reality. Stories focus on the miracle of strength, not the aftermath, the surgeries, nerve damage, and chronic pain. Media celebrates the lift but rarely mentions the physical cost: torn pectorals, detached biceps, ruptured discs. In that sense, hysterical strength isn't a testament to hidden potential. It's evidence of how protective the brain normally is. It shows what happens when the governor fails and the machine runs unbridled. There's another danger when society glorifies these moments: imitation. Some athletes, fueled by motivational myths, chase that high intentionally through extreme stress, stimulant use, or reckless training. But force bypassing barely mimics the original. Synthetic adrenaline spikes, through drugs or intense overexertion, disrupt hormonal balance, raise blood pressure dangerously, and can cause heart arrhythmias. The quest to become superhuman ends in the intensive care unit. Real control over strength doesn't come from disabling. Safety systems, it comes from teaching them to trust you gradually. Even in professional sports, glimpses of this failure appear. Weightlifters snapping tendons mid-competition, sprinters tearing hamstrings right off the bone. These are partial governor overrides. The competitive drive and neurochemical charge of the crowd can override inhibitory feedback. Scientists studying these events note the same signatures as in hysterical strength. Massive adrenaline surges followed immediately by structural failure. The stronger the motivation and emotional intensity, the higher the chance that safety loops will lag behind. So when you hear tales of someone performing the impossible, understand that it's not some hidden reservoir waiting to be tapped daily. It's a controlled explosion. Miraculous, yes, but only once. The systems that limit you most of the time are the same ones that let you move repeatedly, safely for decades. Removing them isn't unlocking potential. It's removing brakes on a vehicle without upgrading the frame. Think of the brain safety network as a guardian engineer. It constantly calculates acceptable stress levels, predicts fatigue, and prevents structural collapse. When that engineer gets overruled, the structure might hold for a heartbeat longer. But after that, the beams bend. The hero moment is fleeting. The repairs are long. Every case of the governor's failure underlines the same evolutionary truth. The brain values longevity over peak output. The cap on strength isn't a flaw. It's risk management. The fact that we can occasionally override it is only proof of how desperate the system must believe the situation is. You can trick your limits briefly, but biology never loses the record. So while adrenaline can hand you a miracle, the aftermath reminds you it wasn't free. The crushed nerves, the shredded fibers, the trembling hands, they're the invoice your body sends for borrowing that impossible power. And that's why the myth of unlimited strength misleads us. It isn't a glimpse of what we could always do. It's a brutal reminder of what we're wisely prevented from doing most of the time. The true awe isn't that we can become superhuman, it's that the brain, most days, saves us from trying. Training to trick the brain. If there's one difference between a one-time miracle of hysterical strength and a lifetime of extraordinary endurance, it's training. Evolution taught the brain to protect, not to perform. So when elite athletes push beyond what seems human, they're not defying biology, they're retraining it. The art is persuading that cautious internal governor that new extremes are safe. It turns out the brain can be negotiated with, just like a stubborn coach who only needs enough proof to let you play harder. Every serious training plan is in essence an argument against fear. Each workout says to the brain, I can survive this. Over time, those repeated proofs reshape neurochemical responses to stress. What once triggered alarm now looks familiar, almost comfortable. This is why seasoned athletes describe finding calm inside chaos. Their bodies feel pain like anyone else, but the central governor interprets the data differently. It's no longer a crisis, just a signal to manage. Endurance training exploits one crucial fact about the nervous system. It favors patterns. Expose it gradually to discomfort, and the brain rewrites its thresholds. Run a little farther each week. Hold your breath a few seconds longer. Lift slightly heavier. Each increment updates risk calculations. The motor cortex learns that blazing muscles or pounding hearts aren't signs of doom. They're ordinary feedback. As those circuits rewire, new strength becomes accessible because hesitation fades. Marathoners talk about this as teaching the brain to suffer better. But scientifically, it's desensitization, not numbing, but reframing. Controlled stress inoculates you against panic, just as vaccines prepare your immune system by showing it harmless fragments of disease. Microdoses of strain teach the nervous system to interpret big stress as survivable. Heart rate spikes that once screamed danger trigger efficiency instead. Over time, you create an internal environment where adrenaline becomes a tool, not a flood. Breathing practice offers one of the simplest examples. Under pressure, most people hold their breath, which actually convinces the brain that danger is increasing. Carbon dioxide rises and stress receptors fire faster. Athletes and special forces trainees flip the equation. They use slow, deliberate breathing to signal safety even when heart rates soar. The pattern activates the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, counteracting the fight or flight impulse. In effect, they learn to keep the system in neutral while the body redlines. Visualization is another mental lever. Before tough events, elite performers mentally rehearse every motion, every spike of discomfort, even the atmosphere of fatigue. Functional brain scans show that these imagined rehearsals light up the same neural pathways as real training. The brain, unable to tell simulation from experience, strengthens circuits for composure and skill under stress. Olympic powerlifters, climbers, even surgeons use this to make rare high-risk scenarios feel routine before they happen. Familiarity dampens fear, and less fear means a quieter governor. Mindfulness weaves itself through these methods. Instead of fleeing sensations, athletes learn to observe them with detachment. They'll describe heat, pressure, tightness, not pain. This precise language reshapes perception. By identifying sensations without labeling them as suffering, the brain stops assigning negative emotions to them. That dissociation limits the spiral of panic and allows performance under discomfort. Studies show mindfulness practitioners possess thicker insulae, the brain regions monitoring internal state, and report faster recovery from intense exercise. Awareness, paradoxically, grants more control than suppression ever could. Compare that to panic-induced adrenaline spikes. When fear rules, energy mobilization overshoots, coordination falters, and exhaustion arrives early. Controlled training builds the opposite: moderate cortisol, balanced glucose, steady adrenaline. What feels relaxed externally is actually hyper-efficient chemistry internally. Endurance athletes sometimes call this flow, a word borrowed from psychology, describing a state where effort feels seamless, self-doubt vanishes, and time distorts. Neurologically, it's a sweet spot between stress too high and comfort too low. Take marathon legend Yannis Kouros. His records in multi-day runs stand unbeaten for decades, not because he was stronger, but because he mastered steady output through self-discipline of the mind. He famously said, "When others get tired, they stop. I don't. I talk to the gods." That phrase wasn't mysticism. It was cognitive rehearsal, a way to externalize pain and keep internal dialogue positive. His body trusted the message because he'd proven it kilometer after kilometer. The pain alarm still fired. His brain simply learned they weren't emergencies anymore. The Wim Hof method takes a similar principle into controlled extremity. Through a combination of breathing, cold exposure, and focus, practitioners raise stress hormones deliberately under safe supervision. Clinical studies show temporary spikes in adrenaline comparable to emergency scenarios, yet participants maintain calm and avoid negative after effects. Their immune and cardiovascular systems adapt because these stress bursts occur predictably and end safely. The brain learns the distinction between threat and training. What would terrify an untrained person feels almost meditative for them. Climbers and free divers follow this model too. They introduce the body to hypoxia, the lack of oxygen inch by inch. Each exposure teaches neural circuits to tolerate carbon dioxide buildup without panic. Free diving world records now exceed 10 minutes of breath. Partly because a diver's brains no longer trigger alarm too soon. The central governor learns that rising CO2 isn't immediate death, but delayed necessity. Repetition converts reflexive fear into factual assessment. Even astronauts train this psychology on Earth. NASA includes stress inoculation drills where alarm sounds, flashing lights, and mechanical failures flood simulators. The goal isn't only procedural memory, it's teaching the prefrontal cortex to stay online when adrenaline threatens to hijack it. Astronauts who pass these tests don't panic faster, they think longer. Their calm under chaos isn't stoicism, it's practice physiology. So why doesn't everyone do this and become unstoppable? Because safe adaptation demands precision. The increments between growth and injury are razor thin. Push too fast, and the nervous system flags danger again, reinstating tight limits or causing breakdown. That's why professional training cycles include rest as seriously as exertion. Recovery tells the brain the story ends safely. Each healed micro-injury is new evidence that the edge wasn't fatal, encouraging the governor to allow a bit more next time. Skipping rest erases that evidence, convincing the brain it was right about danger all along. Modern technology helps quantify this delicate conversation. Heart rate variability trackers, lactate sensors, and neural feedback devices translate internal stress into numbers. Athletes watch those metrics like language learners listening for grammar rules. A rising variability score means the nervous system feels secure. Dropping numbers signal overload. Using data, they sneak up on the edge rather than sprint toward it. This feedback loop between brain and body forms a foundation of sustainable peak performance. Over months and years, the transformation is profound. The governor still exists, it never disappears, but it now trusts the driver. Pain. Signals remain, yet they arrive softer, more specific, less frightening. The athlete reads them like traffic signs, not barricades. The real change isn't in muscle size or lung capacity, it's in communication bandwidth between mind and body. And once that link strengthens, feats once labeled impossible begin to look inevitable. You could call this process tricking the brain, but that's not quite fair. It isn't deception, it's education. You're teaching an ancient system built for survival that modern challenges, marathons, cold plunges, space missions aren't death traps but controlled experiments. With enough repetition, the brain revises its definition of safety. And in that revision lies genuine power, not the uncontrolled chaos of adrenaline-fueled miracles, but the calm, repeatable strength of a mind and body finally speaking the same language. Science names it adaptation. Culture calls it transcendence. Either way, it's proof that the path to unlocking human potential doesn't lie in breaking the brain's safety mechanisms, but in convincing them patiently that greater horizons are safe to explore. Because real superhuman strength isn't born from panic. It's trained into existence, breath by breath, until the edge itself becomes home. Endurance legends and their secrets. When we think of people who've truly rewritten the boundaries of human endurance, names like Giannis Kouros and Eliud Kipchoge rise instantly. They didn't lift cars or perform once-in-a-lifetime miracles. They made the impossible routine. Their achievements look calm compared to the chaos of hysterical strength. But that calm hides the same physiological war, fought with precision instead of panic. Giannis Kouros remains the undisputed monarch of ultra-distance running. In 1988, he covered 1,000 miles in just under 11 days, a record untouched for over 3 decades. That's more than 3 marathons a day, every day, while barely sleeping. His secret wasn't bigger lungs or faster legs, but an unshakable relationship with pain. Kouros claimed the body obeys the mind like a servant. The moment he accepted suffering as normal, it stopped being an obstacle. Modern researchers now understand this statement as a masterclass in pain interpretation. He wasn't born exceptional. He trained his governor to believe 11 days of agony were survivable. Every stride proved safety. Every mile rewrote limitation. Eliud Kipchoge occupies another dimension of endurance. In 2019, he became the first to complete a marathon under 2 hours, 1 hour, 59 minutes, and 40 seconds, in a controlled event designed to test humanity's edge. Physiologically, his oxygen uptake rate approached theoretical limits, but what impressed scientists more was the consistency. His splits deviated by barely a second each kilometer. That kind of precision under exhaustion reveals supreme neural efficiency. Fatigue signals that would stagger others were filtered, categorized, and overridden by disciplined rhythm. Kipchoge described it simply: only the disciplined are free. In neuroscience terms, discipline replaced adrenaline. He accessed near maximum performance without sabotaging his recovery systems. Both runners demonstrate a principle: endurance mastery is engineered calm. Panic leads to spikes. Excellence demands steadiness. Kouros' approach resembled spiritual conversation. He spoke of entering another dimension. Kipchoge's was algorithmic: data, pacing, nutrition, rehearsed breathing. Yet both converge on the same outcome, communicating trust to the brain so absolute that fear dissolved. Their differences highlight 2 paths to identical physiology, faith or formula, both versions of psychological safety translating into extended performance. Contrast that serenity with the Samaritan strength stories from earlier. Those rescues burn bright for seconds. These athletes burn evenly for days. Where hysterical force destroys tissue, endurance refines it. Microdamage occurs, of course: sore muscles, inflamed joints, but within limits the body can rebuild stronger. The balance between stress and repair is tightly monitored by metabolism, sleep, and recovery rituals that feel almost sacred. Kouros practiced deliberate rest cycles and meditation between runs, allowing hormones to reset before pushing again. Kipchoge trained with near monastic regularity, ending each session smiling to signal to his nervous system that hardship concluded safely. That smile isn't public relations fluff, it's neurochemical signaling. Joy tells the brain the danger has passed, reinforcing confidence for next time. Such rituals separate temporary courage from sustainable greatness. Hysterical strength depends on flooding the body with chaotic hormones. Steady endurance relies on regulated chemistry. Oxygen delivery remains high, lactic acid processed efficiently, cortisol contained. Even under extreme distance, these athletes manage to keep their stress within tolerable thresholds. Scientists call this allostatic balance, the ability to maintain equilibrium while adapting to load. Imagine an orchestra performing at full volume without distortion. Every note loud, yet harmonious. That's what unbroken endurance feels like inside their systems. Recovery science backs them too. Modern endurance athletes use periodized nutrition, alternating glycogen depletion and carb restoration to teach the metabolism flexibility. They microdose stress, then refuel strategically so hormonal cascades never spiral out of control. The result is constant communication among gut, brain, and muscle. Food becomes signal, not indulgence. During Kouros' longest runs, calorie intake reached near 5 figures daily. Yet he maintained alertness because each meal was timed to specific circadian points when digestion cooperated best. To observers, it looked obsessive. To physiology, it was efficient coding. The psychological layer mirrors this precision. Where casual runners might juggle playlists or external motivation, the legends retreat inward. Mental quiet reduces wasted energy. Kipchoge's mantra, "No human is limited," is less bravado than self-instruction. Repeating it steadies breathing, aligns stride, and saturates attention so intrusive doubts can't consume. Oxygen. It's metacognition practiced mid-race, exacted through years of reinforcement. Kouros, meanwhile, turned repetition into ritual poetry, reciting verses or Greek prayers rhythmically with his strides. Both strategies accomplish the same feat, creating predictable internal noise that replaces anxiety with rhythm. Other endurance icons reveal similar mental architectures, customized but familiar. Take Wim Hof, known as the Iceman. He ran a marathon above the Arctic Circle wearing only shorts, finished with intact core temperature, and attributed it to breath control and mental focus. Laboratory tests confirmed rapid spikes of adrenaline under voluntary control, proof that training can summon what the nervous system usually guards for crises. Hof's technique bridges the line between chaos and composure, summon the surge without letting it own you. His method gives science a safe playground to study superhuman edges without destroying bodies in the process. Then there's the world of climbers like Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgeson, who free-climbed El Capitan's Dawn Wall over 19 days. Their strength wasn't explosive. It was patient precision under continuous stress. Skin torn, fingers bleeding, they learned to compartmentalize pain until sunrise brought another attempt. On the wall, fear management becomes literal survival. Panic loosens grip. Caldwell described each hold as meditation, his awareness shrinking to fingertip contact and breath rhythm. Neurologically, that's pain modulation via chin control, the same mechanism powering marathon runners' focus. Polar explorers show endurance from another angle. Robert Falcon Scott's 1912 Antarctic expedition combined man-hauling sledges for over 2,000 kilometers in brutal cold. Modern physiology calls their feat metabolic madness, yet psychologically their commitment demonstrates how shared purpose shifts pain thresholds. They endured frostbite and exhaustion not as individual trials, but as collective mission. Social bonding may have extended their operational tolerance as effectively as any modern supplement. Across these examples, a pattern crystallizes. None of these people shattered biological laws. They mastered biological conversation. Unlike the chaos of panic, discipline maintained neurochemical order. Adrenaline minimal, endorphin cyclic, dopamine balanced, a symphony of sustainable stress. The modern sports labs dissect these legends to reverse engineer human edges. Using brain imaging and metabolic tracking, they find that ultra performers activate different neural ratios, less limbic emotion, more prefrontal planning, greater connectivity and interoceptive networks. In plain English, they feel more their bodies but panic less about it. Their sensory map is detailed, not desperate. What makes these studies captivating is that ordinary humans can replicate pieces of the formula. Incremental training, stable mindset, respect for recovery, no magic gene required. The legends just stack these basics with relentless consistency. In many ways, they demystify superhuman by showing it's simply super consistent. Still, their calm efficiency hides a philosophical tension. Where hysterical strength exposes the horror of bypassing limits, endurance feat exposes the temptation to extend them indefinitely. There's nobility in testing capacity, but somewhere between elite mastery and obsession lies danger again. Science can measure lactic thresholds. It can't measure when ambition becomes self-annihilation. Even Kouros admitted moments when the line blurred, when hallucinations whispered he was merging with eternity. His triumph nearly consumed him because the dialogue between safety and desire never truly ends. It just migrates to higher frequencies. That's the hidden secret inside every endurance legend. Their greatness isn't infinite power, it's exquisite balance. Each has learned to flirt with the edge without letting it break them, to convince biology that reaching for the horizon is survivable today and worthwhile tomorrow. Their power comes not from rage or reckless heroism, but from harmony between chemistry and thought. They don't sprint past the brain's safety mechanisms. They collaborate with them until even pain becomes a willing partner. And that collaboration may be the truest form of superhuman, because when frenzy fades and structure takes over, what remains isn't the explosive myth of strength. It's quiet endurance, repeating the extraordinary until it feels like breathing. The chaos of one miracle rescues a single life. The calm of practiced endurance rewrites what life itself can endure. The ethics of enhancement and pushing limits. At some point, the pursuit of human potential crosses from admirable to questionable. It's one thing to train the body and teach the brain to trust itself. It's another to start redesigning biology through science. Humanity's obsession with pushing limits has pushed us to ask, if natural pain and fear keep us safe, should we try to outsmart them entirely? The answer isn't simple. It teeters between evolution and arrogance. For centuries, physical enhancement meant practice and discipline. Now, it can mean gene editing, neural implants, or pharmaceutical shortcuts. The new frontier of performance doesn't begin on the track or in the gym. It begins in the lab. Scientists can already manipulate hormones, tweak muscle fiber ratios, or even alter genes that influence endurance and recovery. On paper, it looks like transcendence. In reality, it reopens the oldest moral dilemma in history. Just because we can surpass nature, does that mean we should? The philosophy dividing this debate sits between two groups. On one side are the transhumanists, people who believe human enhancement is the next logical stage of evolution. They see technology as a continuation of the same drive that made us pick up tools or harness fire. To them, improving memory, strength, or resilience with implants or gene therapy isn't cheating, it's progress. On the other side stand those who see danger in outpacing our moral maturity. They warn that every upgrade risks turning people into prototypes, where human work becomes measured in modifications. History offers fair warning. Every era that flirted with playing God eventually paid a price. In medicine, the 20th century's darker experiments remind us that brilliance without ethics ends in tragedy. When scientist He Jiankun edited embryos to make them resistant to HIV, he crossed a threshold humanity wasn't ready for. The change may have also altered cognitive functions tied to intelligence, actions performed without consent, consequences unknown. It wasn't the science that shocked people, it was the hubris. The same impulse that makes an athlete ignore pain now operates on the scale of our species. The ethical line gets even blurrier in sports. Doping scandals show how desperation for advantage corrodes fairness. Synthetic hormones, blood transfusions, or neural stimulants promise performance but nullify trust. If every competitor modifies their biology, where does sport end and engineering begin? Rules exist to maintain a level field, yet each ban sparks new black market innovation. Some argue regulation lags behind technology by decades, meaning ethical lines move only after damage is done. We already see fans debating exoskeleton-assisted races or gene-clean competitions in the future. The question isn't whether enhancement will enter sports, it's who decides which enhancements count as human. Outside athletics, the stakes grow heavier. Military research invests in neuroprosthetics and biochemical endurance boosters that could keep soldiers awake and alert for days. The logic is survival efficiency. The risk is eroding individuality. If a soldier's pain or fatigue response can be chemically muted, accountability blurs. A body designed to feel limits loses the instinct to question orders or danger. Pain ceases to guide morality and becomes irrelevant. Equity deepens the dilemma further. Enhancements, especially genetic or cybernetic, won't arrive equally. Wealth and access could split society into biological castes, the augmented and the natural. Imagine workplaces selecting applicants with superior endurance or memory not because of merit, but modification. The line between competition and coercion fades fast when survival in a job market demands enhancement. We've seen this pattern before with technology. Early adopters gain power, the rest adapt or disappear. Do we really want that dynamic hard-coded into our DNA? Defenders of enhancement argue that fear shouldn't halt progress. They note how vaccines, artificial limbs, and pacemakers once stirred outrage before saving lives. They frame future upgrades as evolution's continuation. Yet the difference lies in intent. Medical treatment restores lost function. Enhancement aims to exceed natural ceilings. That shift transforms medicine into design, humans into experiments. The purpose behind progress becomes as critical as the science itself. Cultural stories often portray this temptation through the Icarus affect. the idea of flying higher with wings not meant for us. In modern terms, each enhancement invites the same risk. Reaching a realm of capability the human psyche isn't conditioned to inhabit. The brain evolves safety circuits like pain, fatigue, and fear not to torment us but to manage survival's costs. Bypassing them permanently might remove suffering and also empathy. Pain teaches compassion. Fatigue teaches balance. Fear teaches caution. If we engineer those lessons out, what remains of humanity beyond efficiency? Another layer of ethics lies in consent. Adults can choose risk, but enhancements affect generations. Genetic modifications pass forward. A decision made today might alter descendants who never agreed to be changed. Humanity has never held authority at that scale before. The prospect forces us to ask whether we're owners of our biology or merely stewards. Many ethicists argue stewardship demands restraint, that having the power to rewrite nature entails responsibility equal to the potential gain. Even within rehabilitation, ethical gray areas emerge. Consider the use of exoskeletons or neural stimulators for people with paralysis. When the technology shifts from restoring function to surpassing normal strength, does therapy mutate into enhancement? The answer depends on motive and monitoring. A society focused on empathy approves healing technology. One obsessed with competition weaponizes it. Context is everything. From a psychological standpoint, chasing limitless performance can also degrade identity. If pain and limitation define meaning and struggle, erasing them may erase fulfillment itself. Endurance athletes often describe joy precisely because they face hardship and overcome it. A body that never hurts might lose purpose. Struggle, paradoxically, is what gives their achievements moral weight. Eliminating adversity through engineering could sterilize the very feeling humans chase when they test their limits. Still, progress continues. Neuroscientists already experiment with transcranial magnetic stimulation to improve reaction speed. Bioengineers design muscle fibers resistant to fatigue. Some breakthroughs will certainly save lives or ease suffering. Others will tempt humanity to commodify its own improvement. The difference will rest not on science but on philosophy, whether we value capability more than character. The practical question becomes, where should we draw the boundary? Perhaps it's not a single line, but a principle. Enhancement for safety and health, caution beyond that. Society must remember that our boundaries evolve for reasons entwined with empathy and survival. Remove them carelessly, and the very definition of human may drift into something unrecognizable, because nature already supplied an ethical guardrail, pain. It's both signal and symbol, reminding us there's cost in every act of defiance. The drive to amplify strength or erase suffering will always tempt us, but ignoring pain entirely may unmake the moral compass it created. Progress without reflection becomes greed disguised as heroism. So the real challenge isn't deciding how much we can enhance ourselves, it's deciding how much humanity we're willing to lose in the process. The next frontier of strength won't just test physiology, it will test conscience. And if we don't approach that frontier with humility, the stories of superhuman achievement might end not as inspiration, but as warnings echoed by the ones who flew too close to perfection and forgot what kept them human in the first place. The science of controlled pain. Through every story of endurance and every experiment in pushing limits, one truth keeps resurfacing. Pain, when understood, becomes a tool. Not an enemy, not even a barrier. A diagnostic, a teacher, and in the hands of experts, a calibration system. This is the science of controlled pain, where discomfort stops being chaos and turns into measurable data that guides adaptation. Humans can't survive without it, but we can learn to shape it. Modern science treats pain as both a biological sensor and a psychological variable. Soldiers, astronauts, surgeons, anyone operating under extreme precision, train not to avoid pain, but to manage their responses to it. They undergo a process called stress inoculation, developed originally for combat readiness. In simple terms, it means progressively exposing someone to controlled stress until their brain learns that panic isn't necessary. The body still releases adrenaline, but the mind doesn't misinterpret it as danger. Over time, those individuals experience the same stimuli, noise, pressure, even pain with reduced alarm. Their heart rates rise less, their focus lasts longer, and recovery accelerates. The method isn't magic. It's conditioning on a neurochemical scale. Each controlled exposure slightly rewires the brain's amygdala, the fear center, and strengthens connections with the prefrontal cortex, the rational command hub. The result is a quieter threat response. Pain still signals, but it stops dictating behavior. That's why soldiers in training endure grueling obstacle courses or simulated captivity. They're teaching their bodies to stay cooperative under discomfort. When real combat arrives, the sensations feel familiar rather than paralyzing. Astronaut training pushes this idea further. Space agencies design simulations that overload multiple stress systems simultaneously: heat, noise, vibration, cognitive puzzles, all while monitoring heart rate and hormone levels. The point of torture is calibration. If an astronaut can stay composed while his capsule fails in 15 ways inside a simulator, he's more likely to think. Clearly, when one system genuinely breaks hundreds of miles above Earth, control pain becomes rehearsal for survival. In hospitals and rehabilitation centers, pain training takes a different form. Patients recovering from severe injuries or strokes face sensations that feel unbearable at first: stiff joints, burning nerves, muscles that no longer obey commands. Therapists use exposure and gradual progression not just to rebuild muscles, but to teach the brain that pain isn't permanent danger. Functional MRI scans show that when patients reframe pain as progress, activity decreases in anxiety regions and increases in motor planning areas. Their brains literally learn new interpretations of the same signals, restoring motion faster. Sports medicine has adopted similar principles for decades under the label graded exposure. Instead of avoiding movements that hurt, athletes perform them carefully at safe intensities, letting the nervous system relearn confidence. The feedback loop works like a conversation. The body whispers discomfort, the mind answers calmly, and the brain adjusts its alarm threshold upward. Over time, the same motion no longer hurts because fear detaches from sensation. Physical healing and psychological desensitization advance together. On the elite performance side, scientists are getting precise with measurement. Pain response can be quantified by mapping brainwave activity or scanning metabolic markers like lactate and cortisol. In certain military and athletic programs, trainees wear biosensors that track these variables live. Trainers then modulate workload based on the trainee's internal stress signature, ensuring discomfort remains productive but non-destructive. In physiology, this balancing act is known as hormesis, the principle that low doses of stress strengthen the system, while high doses break it. Controlled pain is simply hormesis applied to the nervous system. There's even a parallel in medical diagnostics. Doctors sometimes provoke mild discomfort deliberately to locate malfunction or dysfunction. A nerve conduction study uses electric impulses to evaluate pathways, and the brief sting offers vital information about communication speed between brain and muscle. Pain, in that context, is language data. Too little signal and doctors can't find the problem. Too much means something has gone wrong. We need the sensation because silence would mean ignorance. Psychologically, controlled pain invites self-knowledge. Meditation studies show seasoned practitioners can modulate pain perception dramatically without external help. When researchers exposed both meditators and non-meditators to the same heat stimulus, scanners revealed less activation in pain-related brain regions among the trained group, even though skin temperatures matched. Their trick wasn't anesthesia, it was awareness. They acknowledged the burn without judgment, dissolving the emotional amplification that usually defines suffering. Clinical psychologists now adapt these findings for pain management in patients with chronic conditions, replacing avoidance with mindful curiosity. This philosophy translates beautifully to training. In the lab, athletes who anticipate discomfort react better than those who fear surprise. Expectation rewires perception. Forewarned pain feels smaller. That's why coaches have athletes visualize the worst part of a workout before it starts. Imagining the burn primes the nervous system, so reality feels under control once it arrives. The sensation still hurts, but it loses its power to intimidate. Pain becomes a fact, not a verdict. Even in ordinary life, small forms of this conditioning appear. Cold water immersion, high-intensity interval training, fasting all operate on the same blueprint. Introduce temporary hardship, trigger measured stress responses, then allow complete recovery. The cycle recalibrates immunity, metabolism, and mood regulation. Consistency teaches the brain that discomfort ends safely, diminishing fear across contexts. People often report feeling calmer afterward, not because they enjoy suffering, but because reestablishing control during discomfort creates confidence transferable to everything else. The central insight across all these fields is that reducing fear of pain increases control. When pain is seen as information rather than punishment, anxiety drops and precision rises. Surgeons who train under simulated pressure operate with steadier hands. Firefighters who practice entering smoke-filled rooms breathe slower in real emergencies. Their nervous systems believe correctly that pain signifies alertness, not doom. The physiological patterns remain: adrenaline release, heart rate elevation, but the interpretation flips from panic to performance. There's poetic symmetry in this. The very mechanism that once evolved to scream stop can, through deliberate respect and exposure, become the guide that says steady. The people who master this balance don't chase pain for its own sake. They build tolerance through understanding. They know exactly when to pause and when to press forward. Pain stops being chaos and becomes choreography. In the end, controlled pain reveals the secret architecture of human resilience. The strongest individuals aren't those who feel nothing. They're those who've negotiated peace with discomfort. They've learned that the difference between harm and growth is awareness, not avoidance. Pain warns them when danger nears, but no longer dictates retreat. It's feedback, not fate. That's why disciplines across medicine, sport, and exploration all circle the same conclusion. Mastery doesn't come from silencing pain, it comes from decoding it. Accepting discomfort refines precision, while denying it invites injury. So the real superpower isn't invulnerability, it's fluency in the language of strain. Once you understand that dialect, pain stops standing in your way and starts pointing the way forward. Controlled pain isn't cruelty. It's clarity, the living proof that feeling deeply is how humans actually stay strong. Unlocking human potential responsibly. Every story we've explored of adrenaline, endurance, and pain circles a simple truth. The limits that frustrate us are also the structures that keep us whole. The body isn't the enemy of potential. It's the boundary that defines what potential means. To unlock that safely, we have to do something counterintuitive: respect the brakes as much as the acceleration. Pain, fatigue, and hesitation are feedback loops, not faults. They evolved to give humans flexibility, warning us just before catastrophe, nudging us back toward balance. True progress doesn't come from deleting those safeguards. It comes from teaching them better judgment. That's what training, mindfulness, and adaptation all are. Education for the nervous system. Yet, in a world obsessed with optimization, that idea sounds almost quaint. We like quick results, measurable gains, but the most sustainable advances in human performance always start with understanding what our biology is trying to say. The future of physical and mental performance won't hinge on brute force. It'll pivot on nuance. Athletes, soldiers, surgeons, anyone performing under stress are discovering that strength is situational. Sometimes dominance means exertion. Sometimes it means stillness. Neuroscience backs this rhythm up. Alternating stress and recovery grows capacity without overwhelming the wiring. The human brain can adapt astonishingly fast when given periods of safety to consolidate the lessons pain teaches. Skipping rest sabotages progress. Respecting it transforms limitation into leverage. That same logic scales beyond sport. Everyday resilience, the kind required for work, relationships, or emotional hardship, follows identical chemistry. Each challenge triggers small stress responses. Each recovery resets the baseline slightly higher. The goal isn't eliminating difficulty, but maintaining the conversation between strain and safety. When you push, pause, and reflect in healthy ratio, you turn simple endurance into wisdom. That's the quiet formula behind any sustained human triumph. Technology may tempt us with shortcuts, stimulants that extend focus, implants that enhance feedback, algorithms that predict fatigue before we feel it. These tools can empower, but only if guided by respect for balance. History shows that when ambition outruns ethics, progress mutates into harm. Doping promised fairness until it eroded it. Genetic tweaks promise strength but risk inequality. The responsible path forward requires transparency, choice, and constant reevaluation. Enhancement should augment recovery and safety, not replace the internal dialogue that makes us human. That dialogue between pain and purpose defines every evolutionary success we've ever had. Our ancestors didn't survive ice ages or deserts because they erased pain. They learned its grammar. They differentiated between agony that warned of death and discomfort that meant adaptation. We carry those neural algorithms still, But modern life dulls them with comfort and distraction. Reconnecting with healthy discomfort through training, challenge, reflection reactivates that ancestral intelligence. It's not regression, it's remembering. Philosophically, that memory points to a larger question. What do we actually want when we chase superhuman potential? Is it strength, or is it understanding? Adrenaline can double our force for a moment, but comprehension makes that force purposeful. Without context, power is noise. The next evolution of human performance might not come from extending muscle or coding neurons. It might come from mastering awareness, detecting subtle signals long before extremes are necessary. The best climbers don't celebrate danger. They sense its arrival a second earlier than anyone else. Awareness saves energy, and in biology, saved energy equals survival. There's also a moral dimension to living at the edge. Every push against nature carries a cost, visible or not. The heroic moments, the shattered records, the medical experiments, they all expand the collective envelope of what humans can endure. But at some point, responsibility shifts from asking can we to why do we need to. The pursuit of limits is noble when it deepens empathy and knowledge. It turns reckless when it feeds on the ego or spectacle. Even the most disciplined athletes admit their greatest victories came when they aligned effort with purpose larger than themselves. Team, art, discovery, love. Purpose converts strain into meaning, and meaning reduces suffering's weight. That's not philosophy, that's measurable neurochemistry. Dopamine circuits light differently when goals feel shared rather than selfish. In the end, unlocking human potential responsibly isn't about reaching maximum output. It's about discovering sustainable output, finding that zone where performance feels effortless because every system, mental and physical, collaborates instead of competes. The brain stops fighting the body. The brain stops fighting the body. The nervous system stops silencing pain, and motion becomes conversation. That's mastery, not conquering limits, but cooperating with them so fully that they expand on their own. The coming decades will expand that cooperation further. Neuroscience, biofeedback, even genetic medicine will map every spike and slowdown, giving us unprecedented precision in reading our own biology. But no sensor, however advanced, can replace judgment. Machines can track stress, only awareness can interpret it ethically. The responsibility of future humans is to pair precision with humility, to listen more closely, not shout louder. Maybe that's the real secret buried beneath every tale of strength and survival. The body already knows how to exceed itself. The brain already knows when it's safe. Human potential isn't hidden behind some mythical barrier. It's wrapped inside awareness, patience, and respect for consequence. The day we understand that, superhuman will stop meaning reckless power and start meaning synchronized wisdom. Because ultimate strength isn't breaking beyond our biological limits. It's mastering the language of those limits until they guide, rather than restrain, our evolution. The path forward isn't to feel less, but to feel better. To interpret pain as feedback, to trust recovery as progress, and to realize that every constraint the body imposes is also a design note from nature saying, this is how you survive long enough to improve. So perhaps the next chapter of the human story won't be about defying the brain's safety switches at all. It'll be about learning why they exist and how to work with them to widen the definition of possible, carefully, consciously, and with the kind of strength that doesn't vanish when the adrenaline fades. Strength, in every story we followed, was never infinite, it was elastic. Between every heartbeat of pain and burst of adrenaline stretched the thread that ties mind to body. That thread, constantly tested, constantly repaired, is what keeps us human. The ultimate myth we needed to dismantle was simple. Adrenaline doesn't create strength, it removes protection. It silences the warning systems long enough for greatness or destruction to occur. What people mistake for superhuman ability is actually the brain gambling, momentarily sacrificing safety for survival. Look closely, and every miracle shares that cost. The parent lifting a car, the athlete collapsing after a record, those moments are biological negotiations, not magic. When the brain drops its restraint, we catch a glimpse of our theoretical maximum, but the debt arrives instantly. Pain, exhaustion, and injury are the invoice proving we trespassed through protective design. The heroism isn't in bypassing pain, it's in deciding when risking that bypass makes sense. Understanding this doesn't make the moments less inspiring, it makes them more profound. Behind each legendary feat hides the same self-regulating intelligence that evolved to prevent total collapse. The muscle that quivers near failure, the breath that burns too hot, the fear that whispers stop. They're all components of a safety architecture millions of years old. Ignore them recklessly and you meet biology's wrath. Listen to them wisely and you gain endurance that can last a lifetime. That's the border we've explored, the line between adaptation and annihilation. On one side lives evolution's wisdom, on the other, human ambition. Our species moves forward by testing that line, but survival depends on hearing it snap before it severs. Science keeps finding ways to negotiate better terms, smarter training, clearer feedback, deeper understanding. Yet for all the data, the conversation remains emotional. Every runner, climber, soldier, or patient chasing recovery faces the same inner voice asking, is this worth the cost? Our strength isn't measured by how long we ignore that question, but by how honestly we answer it. The real marvel isn't that the human body can exceed its safe operating limit, it's that it learned how to pull itself back from the edge. Pain is the recall system, the proof that we've gone far enough. Adrenaline gives us seconds of impossible potential. Awareness gives us decades of sustainable power. Put together, they define resilience, the capacity to bend without breaking, to know when resistance builds character and when it builds catastrophe. That balance is the quiet superpower hiding in plain sight. It doesn't roar or glow, it simply endures. It allows explorers to cross poles, athletes to return from injury, ordinary people to keep moving when life's weight feels immovable. Strength isn't the absence of limitation, it's synchronization with it. So when you hear another tale of unbelievable strength, remember what's really happening inside that body. A brain deciding for one dangerous heartbeat that survival outranks safety. And then remember that every day we choose recovery, reflection, and gradual growth, we're performing a quieter miracle, the miracle of lasting power. If this journey into the brain's hidden safety systems fascinated you, explore the next episode on consciousness and resilience, where we'll trace how awareness itself shapes endurance. Subscribe if you want to keep unpacking the science behind human potential, one limit at a time. Because the rarest strength isn't what lifts cars, it's what learns when to stop lifting before everything collapses.